The apostles said to Jesus, the Lord, "Increase our faith." The Lord replied, "If you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it would obey you. Who among you would say to your slave who has just come in from plowing or tending the sheep in the field, 'Come here at once and take your place at the table'? Would you not rather say to him, 'Prepare supper for me, put on your apron and serve me while I eat and drink? Later you may eat and drink'? Do you thank the slave for doing what was commanded? So you also, when you have done all that you were ordered to do, say, 'We are worthless slaves. We have done only what we ought to have done.'" The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. When I was in college, I had a summer job working as a camp counselor. I did that all through college, all 4 summers. I spent about 3 of those summers as just a regular camp counselor, and I had another one as a kind of program director overseeing other camp counselors. And it was really one of my favorite jobs I've ever had. I loved doing it. I was at pretty much the same camp every year. There was something really special about it. It really kind of called to me in a way I can't fully describe. I liked it so much, I ended up kind of working at camps probably a few years after you're supposed to be done working at camps. When I was off in grad school and at seminary, I would still come back and help with the training before camp season would start. I taught a few lifeguarding classes for the camp I worked at. I helped out in a few other ways. I even later got a job through my seminary where I traveled to different church camps and talked about what seminary was like to the counselors and people who were working there. I ended up working at this same camp for a number of years, and towards the end of that time, what tended to happen is I would see new counselors coming in and I would recognize them, because many of them had been in my cabins when I was a camp counselor. They were middle schoolers back then, and now were coming into college and getting ready to work on their own. And that was a really neat experience, and I remember one in particular. His name was Austin. And I remember being at this staff training before the summer was going to start, and there was a little bit of downtime, and I looked over and I asked Austin, why are you here as a counselor now? What made you want to do this? I remember you being in my cabin all of those years ago. What made you want to come back to camp so much that you're ready to work here as a job? And what Austin said to me was, well, I remember when I was in those middle school years, and I remember being in your cabin, and I remember you would look around when there wasn't a whole lot else going on, and whenever you would talk to us, whenever you would ask us questions or we need to get going, you would always call each of us sir, and you would be very polite. You would say please and thank you. You would treat us all with respect, and we were just like 12 and 13-year-old boys. We didn't know what we were doing. And he said that meant a lot to him, the fact that I just called them sir and remembered to say please and thank you and was very polite. That meant so much to him that he decided that camp was a special place, a place where he could be respected, where he could feel like he was at home, and a place that he wanted to come back to. Now, I was pretty surprised by this response, because I took my job as a counselor very seriously, but I assumed that it was all the other things that I did that might have made a difference. The way we scheduled our games and activities, and the way I'd done all of the preparation to make the schedule work just right, and to have all of these bigger things that happen at camp work and run smoothly. And I was surprised that it was just this little thing, the fact that I called them sir, the fact that I said please and thank you. And I didn't have the heart to tell Austin in that moment, but really the only reason I called them all sir is because I couldn't remember their names. It was something that I did without ever thinking about it. It was just something off to the side. I never imagined something like that would be the thing that made a difference to any of those campers. It was a little startling for me. And I think that idea, that kind of phenomenon, is what Jesus is trying to talk about as he's talking with his disciples, with these apostles that are following him. They're asking Jesus to give them more faith. That's literally what they say to Jesus. Give us more faith. Increase our faith. And they're doing that because they can kind of see what might be coming next. They're seeing that Jesus is taking them down a very hard path, that Jesus is trying to really transform the whole world around them, and they know they're not ready. They know they don't have enough prepared. They know that they're not qualified to do any of these things that Jesus is going to ask them to do. But what Jesus tells them is that if you have the faith the size of a mustard seed, a tiny, tiny little seed, you can do more than you ever imagined. What Jesus is telling them is that when God goes to work in the world, God doesn't go to the people who are the most prepared, the most ready, the most qualified, the most believing of everything that they've heard. God goes to the people who are there where God needs to be. God goes to the people who are connected to the people that God needs to talk to be a part of. And that if you only have this tiny little seed of faith in an ocean of doubt, that is enough for God to work through you, to do amazing things, to do more than you ever could have imagined. Jesus is telling the disciples that you don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to have it all together. God is still going to work through you, that tiny seed of faith, and do more than you ever could have imagined. It's like just a simple offhanded comment calling a teenager sir instead of hey you can start to change a life. A tiny little nugget, a tiny little seed of faith, a tiny little moment. God is working through those things and changing the whole world. This is what Jesus' message is for us today, because I think more often than not, this is how God goes to work in our world. Not showing up through people who have this big mountains of faith and are perfectly ready and qualified and waiting for this message from God to deliver, but showing up in people who don't really know what they're doing, who aren't sure what comes next, who have all kinds of doubts and wonders, but just happen to be in the right place, talking to the right person at the right time in that right moment for God to work through them and to do something new. And maybe it's only that tiny seed of faith, that tiny kind comment or smile or little connection that seems to last just for an instant. That can be enough. That can be enough for God to go to work and do more in that moment than we ever thought possible. This is how God calls people into the world. God doesn't call people who are the most qualified. God calls people who just happen to be in the right place at the right time. God calls people because they are in relationship with those around them, because God is going to work in this world whether we're ready or not. God calls us and sends us out each and every day with just a little seed. Just a little bit of faith that might be surrounded by a sea of doubt, that might be surrounded by uncertainty, that might be surrounded by fear or illness or 1,000 other excuses that we all have of why we're not ready to deal with God yet. But that little seed is enough. It's enough for God to work through us, to start something new, and to change lives in ways we never imagined. As each of you prepare to go out this day, back out into the world, into your families, your communities, your workplaces, I hope you can find one moment, just one moment where you think there might be a little seed, a little bit of faith, a little moment, a kind gesture, something that can be planted in a relationship, in a person you know, and a person you never imagined you would be talking to. Because those are the seeds that God works through. Those are the moments that change lives, and we may never even see that day when that seed sprouts into something new, and yet God still works through us that way. God still changes lives, changes the lives of people that we may never see again. And every so often, one of those seeds comes to us. Someone says or does something at the right place in the right time, and it changes us in a way we never thought possible. Every once in a while, we get this glimpse of God working through a person or a place we never thought God could be. Every once in a while, God shows up in our lives, changes us and challenges us to step out, not because we're ready, not because we have it all figured out, but just because we are here. We are here and God is ready to do something new. So as you go out, may you find that seed. May you see that moment where God is at work. May you catch just a small glimpse of what God is doing in your life right here and right now. And may you never be the same again. Will you pray with me? Oh, gracious God, we know that you are at work in this world. We see your face in the people and places we never expected. We see you working through us even though we have no idea what we are doing. We see you touching the lives of people around us. Help us to trust in you. Help us to trust that that tiny seed of faith, however small it may feel, is enough. That it is enough for you to do your work in the world. That it is enough for you to change our lives. That it is enough for you to transform our hearts and send us out to be your people and to follow your Son, Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord. Amen.